Yes, you're right. The Israel interest is very much there. And you know that 2% or 2.5% of Zionist lobby, Jewish lobby exists in states, and they do assert on the economy, on the American economy. And when the elections in Israel are there in September or October, whereas the midterm elections in America are there in November. So how can one make it? How can any one of them make it when there is no support from the Jewish lobby? So the Americans, even the American president is like a handicap without the support of the Zionist lobby or the Jewish lobby. So they have to go back to Israel when it comes to America to find their support. So it is like it's there. If somebody likes it or somebody doesn't like it, but the reality check is that the American economy and the American political setup and even the president of America is dependent one way or the other on Israel when it comes to elections or political support or economy. So how can they ditch Israel at this particular moment?
But in fact, you have mentioned a contradictory situation. Most of the observers evaluate a direct, strict dependence of the policy of the United States from Israel. But don't you think that we have two Israels? We have bigger Israel, a grand Israeli lobby inside of the United States, and we have minor Israel, which is somehow a branch of the US Israeli Zionist policy, which covers the global agenda. That's why every time the strategies are trying to overview these elements in a defragmented, in a separate way, they are actually stumbling upon certain mistakes. You should overview this situation in a global context. And somehow, even the situation with Israel, with the Middle East, is directly linked with the situation between Russia and Ukraine, because all these elements are the parts of the same scenario, which is pro-Zionist and pro-Israeli, which I claim as a grand global ultra-globalist Zionist project. Therefore, when we look at the Middle East and trying to build up a whole set of scenarios, what will be next within the upcoming year, 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years, all the time I used to say that it's better to think not in that minor terms, but to think within 10 years terms, because the global project of the global Zionists are actually measured by 10 years. And they plan to seal up the war between Russia and Ukraine, then launch another level of the war between NATO and Russia. And the third phase is to actually launch a bigger war in the Middle East through revived or, let's say, reconfigured Israel. So this sequence of the things is really important to be overviewed and assessed, because therefore it means that, for example, such power as Pakistan should think in a much longer strategic term and convert its national policy, national security strategy, not in a 5 or 4 years terms, but in 10 years terms, because otherwise the strategic clocks will not coincide with that ultra global agenda. So that's why it's very important to actually consider that while we are talking about dependency between US policy, Israel policy. And another important aspect that there is a strong incentive, attempt to configure the US Constitution in order to fulfill a plan of merging of Israeli military forces inside of the US forces. This is an absolutely unprecedented actually attempt, but let's see how it will happen. But if this goes that way, the same way was going on in Ukraine, because for the last 10 years, we have seen that Ukraine slowly but steadily becoming a part of that grand project, global geopolitical project. by separating Ukraine from Russia and by implementing NATO troops on the borders with Russia. Actually, the same scenario is going to be implemented or is planned to be implemented with Israel. If we remember how Israel was founded, and before it was founded, we have to look back at the beginning of 20th century and Balfour Pact or Balfour Letter. So how the Zionist state has been preliminary stated. So the 99 years of renting the land where Israel is suited now is coming to the end. And we should not forget that that land, Palestine, belonged to United Kingdom. So somehow by merging Israel, by reconfiguring Israel, by making Israel as a state, by the act of abolition of Israeli state, so we are facing a completely new scenario, world scenario. And I think we are going to face within maybe 8-10 years, a new global war in the Middle East. So I think this is important consideration.
Okay, you have your own views about Israel and the new dynamics. Okay, I'll just come to the...
I say it's a possible scenario. It's a possible scenario.
Yeah, you're talking about possibilities. But then again, okay, I'll come to the next question because it needs a lot of debate when it comes to like these possibilities. We can talk about these possibilities for like on an entire show, I would say. But then again, I would come to like Ukraine and Russia conflict. Trump is there talking to the Ukrainian head of state, and they're like, plus Trump says that he's a very good friend of Putin as well. So when should we like see peace coming up in Ukraine? When is this conflict between Ukraine and Russia is going to be over?
As far as I remember, you have asked me that question several times.
Yeah.
And every time I was giving you a sophisticated diplomatic pause.
Yeah.
And I think my pause will be much longer. And it will refer to the answer of the spokesperson of the Russian president, who has recently mentioned that it's not even too early to talk about peace. It's actually the special military operation seems to turn into the real war. Because now a fragile whale of possible diplomatic talks that have been abandoned from the side of the United States, now we have completely another scenario. So we see an escalation and warmongering within NATO, and the recent NATO summit in Turkey is a actually clear confirmation of that there is a tension. And actually, you could see that the US president has been trying very hard to gain an extra support from the side of Erdogan, who has been not supporting Ukraine directly, or indirectly not supporting Russian side. So he was all the time trying to play between the parties. But now we have seen that Turkey is gaining a new political and geopolitical position and role in the eyes of the United States. And actually, how shall we receive it? We shall receive it as a kind of sign of the next wave of escalation. So we don't see that any party within NATO or within European Union, or even from the side of the United States, actually demonstrating a goodwill towards diplomatic talks or peace process.
If I'm understanding it right, if I'm not, please correct me. You're overruling the diplomatic options? You're saying that the diplomatic options are no more there?
Moscow has been never closing the door. So the diplomatic options are always there. Mm-hmm. And Moscow demonstrated all the time a goodwill. So I hope you don't believe that the Russian army was not capable to get Kiev within so-called a couple of weeks. Of course, it was possible, but Russians never did it. And that's why that operation was named a special military operation. So it gave a really deeper space for maneuvering and for diplomatic talks. But that chance has been never taken by the Ukrainian side, because we understand that Ukraine is not an independent state. It's completely placed itself in the arms of the West. So practically NATO is in a direct conflict with Russia.
Yeah, because NATO was like coming on at your backyard, and so obviously you had to like take action. But initially, when this conflict between Russia and Ukraine started, the observations were that Kyiv will be like captured by the Russian forces in 3 to 4 days' time. And that's what you're saying. But anyways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So maximum time which was being discussed was that Russian forces will be in Kyiv in like 3 or maximum 4 days' time. Anyways, one last question. In your recent show, you said that you had been helping out Iran in some hypersonic technology. Is that support still on? Have they gone like independent or indigenous? Have they started making that stuff indigenously?
I think no power in the world today is a completely, independent island. Of course, all the powers are interconnected. It doesn't mean that even if they're not connected by the Defense Pact or some special agreements, of course, they can have opportunity to gain any technologies, from any part of the world. So the same thing we can say in relation to Iran and Pakistan, in relation to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and China. So don't expect that I will give you an absolutely exact and clear indication.
No, I'm
Russia
not looking for
supplied.
that. I'm not looking for that,
Yes,
but I'm just...
But I would rather say that and confirm that Russia and Iran are staying close allies, and Russia, by all diplomatic means, have several times confirmed, as well as China, confirmed their support to Iran, to its sovereignty and to its right to defend themselves. So I think that if when Iran decides or continues to promote that kind of self-defense campaign, of course, I think Russia and other observers can confirm that, will be willing to prolong and to stretch their hand to Iran by all possible means.
By all possible means.